Hello everyone, welcome to another session of the Film Voyage. Today we have with us Mr. Atul Sabharwal. Thank you so much for doing this, sir.
Thank you for calling me.
Before I get into your filmography, as we talked about earlier also, is that I wanted to know is that you have been an avid cinephile. That's the first thing that I can observe in your body of work throughout.
Okay.
That you've been an avid cinephile, and from what I can see is that there's always, I wouldn't say influence, but there's an understanding of genre from a deeper level, not just from an intellectual level, but understanding how a genre works. So what has your relationship with genre been like as a creator right from the beginning?
Nothing at the conscious level, to be honest. The understanding, I mean, if you say so, because I haven't been very conscious of, I try to tell the story the way it should be told. Of course, I take certain pride in knowing how a story should be told visually in terms of what a short division should be like. But I don't dwell deep into genres as much as, what the story is asking me to. And I think genre or certain things are the labels that we tend to put later on. I mean, what came first, the story or the genre? I'm sure the story came first, whenever, as far as back you trace the genesis of that. So, genre, I don't think I'm given a serious thought about.
Do you remember the first story you ever wrote?
I think so, yes.
What was that about, if you can talk about it?
You asking for feature films or first story in life?
First story in life that you thought of?
I think it was a school assignment. We were asked to write about, I think, 3 things I found in my grandfather's suitcase.
Oh.
It was an English assignment, I think literature or something, which was given in the 9th standard. So that was the first story I wrote about. Of course, I wrote it fictionally, like I made my grandfather, to be a runaway prisoner from some jail or something like that. But yeah, that was the first story ever.
You grew up in Agra, if I'm not wrong. So early on, what were your earlier influences in terms of cinema? Because I know for a fact that you've been a huge Hindi mainstream fan.
Right.
So what were the earlier films that you remember very clearly that you saw?
Mostly black and white films from Doordarshan, because what we used to have is whenever there was election happening in the country, so there was something called Parliament News, and they would shut down all other broadcasts so that people focus on Parliament News, which would broadcast election results. So that people focus on Parliament News, in between Parliament News they would broadcast movies. And I've seen some of the best Indian classics in those broadcasts, like Bandini and Do Bigha Zameen, Kagaz Ke Phool, Sahib-e Ghulam used to come in those. So yeah. And those were the only days when they used to have a late night slot for Hindi. So Gulzar's Achanak they would air, because the last counting would go on till 11 p.m. So that you attend the 11 p.m. news, they would broadcast a late night movie also.
At one point, did you realize that you want to make a living out of films, like be in the film industry or probably create films at some point?
Yeah, I never thought of making living out of films. I just wanted to make films, even if I have to live in poverty for that. But I think I was 12 years old when I saw Subhash Ghai's Ram Lakhan. That is when I sensed the director behind a movie. And then what would happen in that age is that once you sense a director, then you tend to wonder, okay, well, these are the films that I have liked of that director in the present, and then I would go back to their previous films, find video cassettes of those and watch them, and just sort of have an idea of a filmography or the style of a director. And so yeah, Ram Lakhan was the first one.
When you say you felt the presence of a director in a film, that can, like for different people, it's like if they remember an image or they see a scene being shot a certain way or presented a certain way. What was it in Ram Lakhan?
I don't think at 12 you can tell how differently a scene is shot, but it was the imagery. Because I think Ram Lakhan was the first film where Subhash Ghai was working with Ashok Mehta, the cinematographer. And what Ashok Mehta, coming from parallel cinema, because he had shot 36 Chaurangi Lane and Trikal before that, so he gave a certain sense of aesthetics to a mainstream film, and the music of that film was very different, that you could tell. So the thing was in '89 when both Ram Lakhan and Parinda came, which were the same star cast almost, Anil Kapoor, Jackie Shroff, Madhuri Dixit. But what both these films had, they had better aesthetics than the Hindi film audience was used to, and that as an impressionable mind was the first thing that my brain registered, that you can do mainstream cinema with great aesthetics, and it tends to look even much more better. And as then I grew up further, when Ram Gopal Verma made Rangila or Satya, or Vinod Chopra made his second film, 1942 Love Story. Mani Ratnam was slowly coming into Hindi with Roja and Bombay. So you suddenly started seeing mainstream Hindi movies with color Hindi movies with great aesthetics. We've had great aesthetics in black and white, but color Hindi films did not have that fine an aesthetic. And then again, Doordarshan, because you would see Balu Mahendra and Mani Ratnam's films on Doordarshan, especially the Sadma, the original of that, and Naigan. Because I think Mr. Kamal Hassan got national award for that. So
Naigan you saw on Doordarshan?
Yeah. I saw Agni Nakshatram also on Doordarshan.
And this was in the original language itself?
Yes, with subtitles.
Okay. You used to play with subtitles
on
Doordarshan?
Yeah.
Wow. Talk a little bit about what stayed, like in terms of, like for example, I'll talk about, I was 12, I was also 12 when Powder came out.
Okay.
And it was on Sony TV.
Right.
And this was not like any serial, because we were used to TV serials on Sony TV. So it was, because there's a limited number of episodes, it looks a certain way. So the first thing that registers in my mind, or at least when you guys were just starting out, the films, they had a certain look. They looked, now we can say that high contrast visuals, real locations, all of that. But they looked apart from what the usual stuff was being done. For the lack of a better word, thoda Angrezi filmon jaisi dikhti thi. So what was it about Ram Lakhan and those images that stayed?
I think what you've answered your own question, that it looked different. And it sounded different, though the songs were the same and everything, but there was a certain approach to the background score. I had not seen action scenes being filmed against songs, which was there. And then when I started watching previous Subhash Ghai films like Karma and Hero, I thought, okay, there is a pattern, but this time it's been done with such great aesthetics of Ashok Mehta, because no other person, I think, was changing in the crew, that it definitely made an impact. Especially the twilight shots.
Yeah. And while you were watching these films, what was your learning like from early on? Like when you got interested in filmmaking, how did you? What was the first encounter with the idea of craft? That okay, I need to learn certain crafts of making a film or writing a film.
No. It did not come to me that way. It just came to me that when I saw Ram Lakhan, that I'm born to do this and this is something that I am great at. So, it must have been like Beethoven first encountered music. So, it just fell in place, so to say.
What was your first encounter with the RGV like? Because I'm sure he has influenced you in a lot of ways.
Right.
So, what was that
My
like?
first encounter with RGV was I was called by somebody else sent to that office to write Ek Hasina Thi.
Okay.
And which I did not want to, because he was not directing it, and I was not even supposed to meet him. I was supposed to meet Sriram Raghavan and Pooja Lada, and I met them. So my first impression of him was that each time I would just see him coming in and out of his door, walking, doing something, and all that while I was just trying to think whether I can grab his attention just by sitting here. But I didn't end up writing that film, and I didn't end up meeting him for that film. But many months later, or maybe a year later, then I ran into Anurag Kashyap, and my mobile was cut because I had not paid the bills. So I had been trying to find you, where were you? So I said I had gone to get my phone activated, and he said no, but I've told Ramu to call you. So how will he call you? So I said, you give me the number and I'll call. So he gave me the number, and the next day when my phone was activated, I called him. And he said, come and meet me. And Ramu that way was very easy. You could directly call him and meet him and all that. And I met him, and he said, I have a certain idea and I want you to develop it. And that is how I met him. But very normal conversation, nothing out of the blue and all that.
Because you probably met him at that period of his, when he was already peaked. And it was, I think, after Company you met him.
Yeah, just after Company. The booth was under production.
Yeah. So, what was he like then in terms of just as a filmmaker who is hiring a writer? Like, what were those conversations like? What would he brief you?
He didn't brief anything. So, I mean, he first of all realized that the briefs are not working, because whatever he was telling me, I was writing completely off. So then he said, okay, let's do this as an exercise. So he narrated the story to me till a certain point, and it was a short story. Darna Mana hai. That story became what Antramali and Sohail Khan did. So he narrated me till a certain point, till the husband disappears. And he said, now you write what happens next. And I went home and I realized this is my last chance, and this is one person I've always wanted to work with. And if I don't crack it, then I won't crack it. You know? So I wrote that story. And when that story ended, I went to brush my teeth at the night and I felt scared in my own bathroom. So I said, okay, no matter what happens tomorrow, if I've written this story and I've managed to scare myself, I've done what I like. Even if I don't get this job, I've done the best that I could. And then next day I went to him, and when you have that kind of experience or the faith in yourself, then I just left it at his table. He said, you didn't type it. I said, no, I write in hand. I don't have a computer. So then he assigned me a computer. I typed it. I left it at his table. He said, I'll read it tomorrow. I said, no problem. I was going back by bus. There used to be a cassette shop, Planet M, in Shoppers Stop. So I stopped there just to... I had no money to buy it, but I just loved looking at DVDs and cassettes and CDs. So I was standing there and my phone rang and it said Ram Gopal Verma. And I realized if he's taken trouble to call back, then he must have loved it. And he said that, I just finished reading it and I jumped in my chair. I said, great. I said, can you come tomorrow? And that is how we started. So what my impression was, like what the revelation to me was that he's the biggest cinephile before a film. He's a filmmaker and he could quote... I can't do that, but he can quote books paragraphs and paragraphs of Godfather and Fountainhead or even which one is this?
Midnight Children.
Freedom at Midnight.
Freedom at Midnight, yeah.
Has he done that on your podcast?
Not on my podcast. I've seen it somewhere, and I was like, how can he verbatim almost that's mind blowing how he does it.
Yeah, not just that, he remembers the page number also.
Exactly. Do you remember that story? Because we remember that film very clearly. I've even spoken to you about that.
Which one?
Darna Mana hai.
Right.
The Antramali Sohail Khan story where when he comes back and she sees that hand and all of those images. What were you like when you had there's so much going on? Kaise yaar crack karna hai almost in a way ki abhi ye insaan impress ho jaye mere se. It might have started like that. Like this is my last chance. But after a point वो कि अच्छा ये कहानी का एक सर्टेन सुर है और उसको मुझे एक एंड में एक ट्विस्ट की तरह लाना है या जैसे भी लाना है. How did you reach there? What was and subsequently the other stories that you wrote, that Apple story, that homework wala story, all of these very like we remember those stories not because कि उसमें कौन था, because of what happened in those stories. So what was that entire writing that entire film like?
It was interactive, give and take. We would do the same exercise except that I would do it with much more confidence. That he would suggest a situation, then I would add upon it. It was more like a theatre improv.
Okay.
And that is why that film feels like good film in parts and not also great film in parts, is because it was more of give and take, but nobody put effort into bringing it together. So the stories work, but the larger story doesn't work with those 5 youngsters or 6 telling tales around fire and Sushant Singh killing them.
वो किसने लिखी थी?
That was nobody wrote that. I think they just as they were shooting they made it up. So
that time there was no concept of like making it a pure anthology. Like 10 Kahaniyan was I think the first out and out anthology. Us time par it was just stories, but they had to have a connecting thread like that.
Like I said, once the stories were done, then how to weave it around, that was something Prawal, the director, and Ramu figured it out between themselves.
Okay.
And I think Abbas Tyrewala wrote the dialogues for that. So I was not part of it, thankfully. It was a torture by then.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is it torture?
No, because the team had spread, and initially those 4 stories that I wrote were with Ramu. So that was great fun. But by then, and I could see and I could tell that it's not organically coming together. If you see the casting of those, of that part, the main story also, it's a bit patchy. Ramu's own nephew is acting as one of the characters, and there are a bunch of other characters who are not fitting that. So,
yeah. Before that, I think on IMDb your first credit is Supari.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? That was your first film?
That I came very last. I mean, there's nothing in the film that survives that I wrote, and I think in all I didn't write more than 10 pages because that film that was getting made, then getting shut. So the writers were changing, and I was just the last one. Last schedule bacha hai just, because the thing was nobody used to write scripts. They would narrate a story, and then every schedule the scenes would get written. Sometimes on the set. So I was that person on the set who would
in the last schedule.
In the last schedule.
So how did you get that gig? Like from when you came to Bombay, like होता ना कि अच्छा अभी एक as a writing job जैसा अभी यहाँ पर हम लोग बोलते हैं कि
I really don't remember how I got that. I really don't remember. I have no memory of it, except that the director, Mr. Padam Kumar, his house had great food, South Indian food. So that was our remuneration, that you can eat.
And from the Darna Manaya films, like My Wife's Murder was completely written by you.
Yeah.
How did that idea take place?
I think it was inspired by a news item that Ramu had read in Hyderabad.
Okay.
Many years ago. I don't remember what the news item was, but again, he just narrated it to me till the point a husband slaps his wife and she falls and she hits her head and dies, and what would happen later on was the thing, like balance you have to write. And that I remember because he was shooting, I think he was shooting Nach at that point, or could be the shoot of Bhoot also, I don't remember. But yeah, on the set I met him. So it was like in between a lighting break, he came out, he said, this is half the idea, and would you be interested? I said, yeah, sounds good. And then he went back to shoot and I went back home and wrote.
So this exercise, which sounds very interesting, that you give a situation and उसके बाद character के साथ क्या होता है या plot में आगे क्या होता है, you just figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, it sounds like a great exercise, but don't forget that it's coming from a great storyteller.
Of course.
So whatever he's set you up, he's given you a great engine.
Yeah, exactly.
There have been enough dumb people doing this way, but that what they have set you up is so uninspiring that you can't develop.
That's true. But with that, exactly, and then there's more at stake also because the setup is so nice. It can go either way.
Yeah.
So you still follow that exercise where you just take a premise and you feel that, okay, I have a character in a situation and let the character find its way or something like that?
No.
You don't do that? You have it all chalked out beforehand?
No, I don't know. I just organically try and fit. And the stories come in a very different way.
Because in your writing, I see this, that why I started with an understanding of genre and an understanding of drama from a deeper level is that your characters are always at a crossroads and there's a choice to be made. And it's very clearly we can see that with every character. Even say when Binod Das has to save Jamshed, or even when Jay has to stab someone in the crowd. It's a clear choice and a clear that okay, either this or that. It's never in that zone कि अच्छा something एक कुछ grays में भी छूट जाए, but there's clear action. Aurangzeb में भी है with Arya's character. So it feels like what you mentioned कि वो एक होता है कि the character has to explore in a particular situation. Is that something you organically do, or you find it interesting drama?
I think it would be both. A, it comes organically, and B, you have to set up situations for character. So that you explore, like how does a character become a hero? It's only by ingenuity. If the ingenuity fails, it's drama. If the ingenuity succeeds, then the heroism falls in place. So, and that I think once you have been brought up on Shakespeare and Hindi films, you get a sense of it.
What's your idea of a hero? Like from what you read in Shakespeare or in Hindi films? Because Shakespearean heroes always have consequences created by them, is if I can read it that way.
Not Shakespeare's heroes, his protagonists.
Protagonists, sorry. Protagonists.
I don't think they have, he has heroes as such, like whether it's Caesar or Macbeth or Othello or Hamlet or anybody. What I mean by heroes is somebody who attempts, ingenuity. That could be even a villain. I don't think Binod Das is essentially a hero, or even Prithviraj's character in Aurangzeb, they are not essentially heroes. He's a corrupt policeman. But when faced with the decision, that is where the heroism would... And heroism is personal to them. It's not for the world to decide whether they're heroes or not. If you look at it from a societal prism, Binod Das is not a hero. He does... Every act is selfish. It's just that how he pulls himself out of each situation is what sort of, and same for Jay Khanna. He betrays more people than he supports in the course of the story, especially the one he loves the most. But it's the ingenuousness of his decisions that sort of endear him to people, and how he strives for it. And same goes for Arya or for anybody in Aurangzeb or even Anil Kapoor for that matter in My Wife's Murder.
Again, these are situations where they're faced with situations, and in a very Greek sense of the word, because Greek tragedies usually are कि एक होता है कि आप उस सिचुएशन में आ गए हो, उसमें आपका कंट्रोल उतना नहीं है, पर जो शेक्सपियरियन नेचर है आपकी कहानियों का कि ये सिचुएशन भी मेरे से ही कहीं ना कहीं निकली है. It's a balance of both of these.
Yeah, but that is also Indian mythology to an extent. See, an exile is forced upon Ram.
Yeah.
Or on Pandavas. But what happens in that exile, then everything else is a decision making. Good decisions, bad decisions, both. Wrong decisions, right decisions. So each step then, and as a writer, then you start exploring with them. Like, you don't know where my end is. You have an overall thematic arc, but as you keep moving forward, the situations and the decisions to deal with them keep emerging.
Did you learn film writing per se? Like, I'm not saying going to a film school or something like that, but did you read any book on film writing, or what was your film writing learning like?
I think I was fortunate enough to born in an era where the internet had started and I could download a lot of Hollywood scripts. And there was this website called screentalk.org. I don't think it's functional anymore. So if a film has won an Oscar for writing, they used to have the Oscar emblem next to it. So I would just download all the Oscar scripts and I would read them. That's my so-called training.
Wow. So do you remember any of the, like, what was the first screenplay that you read?
I think initial few were Silence of the Lambs and Pulp Fiction, Being John Malkovich, which is a film that I don't know why it's not talked about so much. Then I think there was a book somebody had gifted me about 3 screenplays, Kieslowski's trilogy. Those 3 screenplays, Red, Blue and White.
You read the screenplay first or you watched the movie first?
I had not watched these films. I only read the scripts.
You read the scripts first, and when you saw it, because this is what happened with me when Hateful Eight की script leak हो गई थी. So I think we all read it पहले, and then when we saw it, I was like, अच्छा this is how it gets translated. So that's when I also understood कैसे director करता क्या exactly.
Right.
So what was that like when you saw these films from script to screen?
I felt I could have done them better. With all of them. Yeah.
Even Kieslowski?
No, Kieslowski, see, it's a very different thing. But not Kieslowski, but definitely with Silence of the Lambs, I felt that.
Why do you say that?
I don't know. I will have to go with you scene by scene and say, okay, this is how I would have done it.
No, but
so it's the thing of, I'm reading that script and there's a film getting made in my head, which I'm thoroughly enjoying. When I'm watching the film, it's not matching the film that I've enjoyed in my head. So my comparison is that if I were to do it, I would have done the film that played in my head. At least I'm allowed to believe that. Whether I would have achieved that much or not is a secondary question, because then the reality. But it did not match up to the film in my head.
So since your screenwriting learning has been more through reading scripts, how much of the Hollywood idea of a screenplay do you really subscribe to? Like the 3 acts or second act ke midpoint?
I could not tell. I don't even know about that. So that was my first part of learning. The second part was learning through Ramu editing my scripts.
Okay.
So I would give him a draft and then he would, because there were no computers, so he would sit with the pencil and he'd edit, like how a publisher or an editor of novel edits. Like he would cut out some lines, make arrows, move some lines up and down, and then he would say, okay, see this, how this looks to you and how this reads out to you. And that is when you realize, okay, you've written 50 lines, but maybe 30 would have done and better in this order that he's doing. So as you see that happening, because what he's applying there is his first film was in 89 and I'm talking about 2000, so 11 years of experience into that, what the script that I had written. So that bettered me in terms of A, economy, and B, structuring. What
do you find, because structuring is what I feel was something that kind of, for the lack of a better word, didn't do justice to Aurangzeb, is what I felt. Right in the first 15-20 minutes, we had And it is, again, I can see why that idea would really be fascinating, because it's playing on a certain sense of dramatic irony that everyone knows everything, the audience knows this.
Right.
But do you feel that if there was an element of perhaps certain revelations being done, not as twists, but just revelations, over the course of the story, would have been a little more, there would have been more at stake there?
I can't say. I don't even know whether I was trying to make that kind of film that you're saying.
Okay.
What happened was that there was a beginning which got cut.
Okay.
And that beginning was there to set the point of view of the film, which is Arya's point of view, Prithvi Raj's character.
Okay.
And once you take that beginning out, so the film was about this guy who has been shot, has a bullet in his body, and is trying to drive back home. Later on you realize he was shot by his own uncle and all that in the end, but the beginning was that he's shot, he's in the car, and he's driving back, and as he's driving through the city, the whole film comes to him as a flashback. So you come back in the end to that moment where he's driving home and you don't know whether he'll make home or not, and then he reaches his home and he collapses. But once you take the beginning out, what you have is some random voiceover talking about the city, and then you have these characters being introduced. So you don't know why are these characters being introduced, as to whom to follow, whom not to follow. Of course, your mainstream trained mind would tell you to follow Arjun Kapoor because he has double role. So it got a bit muddled because it didn't find its focus right in the beginning. But if you care to watch, there's a YouTube clip which says Aurangzeb alternate beginning. Then you watch the film after that, you'll get an idea.
Okay. Why was it cut? Because of the rhythm or like time frame, या फिर बस?
Controversial, I can't answer that. But not my decision, I can tell you that.
समझ गया. बात कर सकते हैं सर रिलीज?
Yeah, of course.
फिर ठीक है, क्योंकि सर क्लास ऑफ 83 भी मुझे लगता है कि काफी कंट्रोवर्शियल है उसकी एडिटिंग में.
बट वो तो मैंने बोल दिया है. आई मीन देयर इज एन इंटरव्यू ऑन.
नहीं, आई सॉ इट, बट वो लाइक उसमें जो आपने कहा था कि जो एक लिटरेरी एडेप्टेशन भी थी, आई फील कि वो सिर्फ एडिट से भी कई स्टेप पहले वो चीज़ इंटरवेंशन from a governing body, if I may say.
No, see, the book was not written when we were making the film. We started making the film when there was just 3-page synopsis, or must have been 5 or 10 or 15, I don't remember, but it was from a synopsis that Mr. Hussain Zaidi had written. The book was not yet written. The book, in fact, even when we finished shooting the film, the book was not yet written. And after that, when the film was in post, that is when he started writing it. So it was just a concept. We stayed loyal to the synopsis, but then the book is not loyal to that synopsis. You know, the book became, I think, about Mr. Pradeep Sharma. I haven't read the book till date. So in that way, to judge that film in comparison with the book is not going to help, because, you know, it was something like you're starting with the same synopsis in 2 different mediums, but they're going to be very different products.
And now coming to the edit, it had a kind of like a journey wala sense. It was supposed to, because it covered a few years.
Yeah.
But it felt like, you know, it had to be chopped out very.
So I'll just explain it in an analogy. Anybody who wants to dive deep into it, there's somewhere an interview of mine online. I think Vague Visages or Visual Visages, I don't even remember the website. They can read it there. But Aurangzeb, no matter what happened, so if you take a song, you know, take any of your favorite song which has Mukhla, Antara 1, Antara 2, you know, like a structure, and so often it used to happen in the cassette era that the music company would cut out one part because they had to fit the song in side A, side B, you know, there's a length to the tape, it's not streaming. But they won't tamper with the melody, they won't tamper with anything. The song is the same, you might miss a few meaningful things here and there, you know. That's Aurangzeb, you know, that you just took certain things out which they felt okay was impacting length, but the melody remained intact. What Class of 83 is, it's a bad remix of a song of which originally you never heard. So that's some chopped up remix, restructured thing which is there in front of you and you've never seen the original. So yeah, that's what it is.
Is there
it doesn't even have the original melody.
Okay, it doesn't exist. The original melody doesn't exist even in its any form, in a very rough form also.
It exists on my hard drive, but I'm not going to give it to you.
Of course not. But you had your fun in class of 83 also. You got Vijusha.
Yes, Vijusha was there.
With everything, I see a certain cinephile also in you who's having fun with every film. What is that something that you do just for because?
No, I think he is a great composer.
No, that he is, of course.
I was looking forward to working with somebody old school. I think my second choice would have been Pappi Lahiri for that film because I wanted a certain soundscape. But when Viju sir said yes, then we went with him.
But because it has, all of a sudden we could it was because it was the 80s or it's just because of course we have Bobby Deol sir also in there and for us it was more like.
No, Viju came before Bobby.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So even if the Kumud Mishra had done that part, Viju Shah would have scored that film.
It's lovely score.
Yeah, but that's what happens. Like, he's very strong with melody. All your old school composers are. Yeah. He's very strong with melodies, and I wish he had a little more free hand in terms of doing what he did. Then the whole process would have become a little more joyful. It was just too much feedback riddled for him, and from different directions. And he said, I come from the school where only director says what to do and nobody else says anything. But also his directors have been very strong producers. Yeah. Whether it's Mr. Feroz Khan when he was assisting with his father Kalyanji Bhai, and later on Rajiv Rai, very strong directors. Rajiv Rai is, of course, his father is producing, so nobody's going to mess with that. So he comes from that school, and he would have enjoyed the process more had it just remained focused to what he got excited about when the director told him the story or the narrative.
Coming back to your earlier work as you were going along, what do you see that your early work lacks that you now know in terms of craft, strictly speaking in terms of craft?
Difficult to say. I just am more technically aware that I wasn't earlier. Like the ideas are the same, but you realize the pitfalls that you were not aware of between the idea and the realization.
Pitfalls such as?
There could be many. There could be like you don't know lighting as much as you should. So you know what a good lighting is, but if somebody has done it incorrectly, you don't know how to correct it or how to point it out or how to articulate it. And that is what you get better at as you direct more.
And now you feel like, as opposed to earlier, you have a more...
Of course, it will happen. Like you'll see Reservoir Dogs, it looks, the cinematography doesn't look as great as, Inglourious Bastards. There's an evolution. Memento does not look as great as... and it's not resources, it's the evolution, that the director can point out. And also working with better crews, you get better at selecting the right crew also. Not experience necessarily, even if you're working with newer people. And I've only worked with debutant DOPs in all the projects, whether it was Aurangzeb Class of 83 or Berlin. Now, none of these people had done a feature film before they worked with me. So that's what you get better at, I think.
Where do you feel freer, as a director or as a writer?
But freer in what sense?
In sense that this is something that you're doing where of course, direction is you're handling so much and all of that is going on. But as a creator, what do you find more liberating, if I can say that? Like writing or just visual?
Since I'm writing screenplays, that can't be liberating. That's the first step towards filmmaking.
Okay.
Right. So if a film does not get made, what good is that liberty that I may have enjoyed sitting at my desk? So it's the overall process. I don't separate writing from filmmaking.
Okay.
I mean, screenwriting from filmmaking.
Direction, per se.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, why I ask this is that certain people are, you see in their work that they are writers who direct and not like directors who write. Like, मेरा controversial हो जाएगा.
No, but
like this is
name anybody in the world.
Okay.
Somebody who can't catch your throat.
Okay. Charlie Kaufman.
Okay.
Charlie Kaufman, for example, when he directs like a film like say Synecdoche in New York or I'm Thinking of Ending Things, you see that there's the overlooming effect on the film is of the idea, which should be in most cases, but there are certain directors who are writing films,
right,
or like their own. I would say to some extent Vikram Motwani sir. I see that his ideas are more driven by the atmosphere that the characters are living and how he's going to visualize it. So or to some extent, if I may say, even you too. Like that's what I've read that as in terms of when I saw Berlin, I could see that there's an idea which inherently is very old school Hollywood, if I can say that. But the way it's put together, the way it's visualized, that minimalistic idea of putting it together, it feels like okay, there's a very strong direction point of view that has taken over the script.
See, anybody who's directing, I feel, is a director. I don't judge them by, oh, he's a writer who's directing, or he's a director taking the writing forward or something. I think it's utter bullshit. I even heard it in a documentary recently that, when you don't pay writers, the writers go and become bad directors. I don't subscribe to that either. Because I think something very beautiful was said to me by Mr. Goldie Bell. As I was walking into the cinema hall to watch Aurangzeb, he was coming out. And by then I knew it does not have good reviews and all that. And so he said, congratulations. And I said, but the reviews are bad. He said, boss, tumne picture lagai hai. That itself deserves a medal. Because somebody who's been in the business and has been on the mainstream side of business knows that what an act of bravado it takes. Like there are 100 film ideas floating in the market, and it's sheer miracle that any sperm would find egg and would end up in a cinema hall or an OTT streaming or television right now. How difficult, what a miracle that it needs. And if somebody has managed to put it together, good, bad, ugly, whatever, because if that's the person's first film, she or he is only going to get better. Even if she or he does not get better, maybe they're getting better at hustle because they're doing it again and again. So there are a mix of entrepreneur, filmmaker, writer, everything. So then whatever people enjoy, those people get more opportunities whose tickets audience buy or the subscriptions audience take. And then there are those who don't, but still they at least get better at hustle and they keep making films.
What I meant strictly from point of view that okay, if you read certain scripts like Pulp Fiction for that matter, or even Kill Bill, there's a clear literary idea of writing a screenplay which is very distinct to, very specific to Tarantino only.
Right.
So when he makes those films, you do see that okay, it's someone writing that is kind of in a way independent of the form is what I'm saying of making that film. Certain screenplays you read, like when say Sudeep Sharma's scripts, if
I haven't read.
You haven't read anything. Certain scripts where it's like the action line and then there's a dialogue, that all the scripts are like that, very economical.
Yeah.
But certain times you see visual cues, a lot of visual cues, which are coming from a very directorial point of view. I'm talking strictly in terms of that.
I don't think the screenplays are meant for that. I think you're judging Tarantino of being more of a writer because he's a great writer and a great director.
Yeah.
So it's unfair to say that just because the screenplay is so well written and has a literary quality, that makes him a lesser of a director.
Of course not. I don't mean like that.
Or anybody for that matter. But even if the screenplay was not that well written, I'm saying it did not have a literary quality, even if he's just scribbled it in a diary as in shorthand, but can make a great film. I think it's both. Still a great writer and still a great director. No?
Of course. I'm saying these two facets, sometimes one overpowers the other in certain films, don't you think?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now as coming to Powder, which was I think the first time you directed.
Right.
Yeah. At the onset of like carrying on shoots and everything, it was a series. So what did you learn? Because in series, there's a certain language you need to stick to over a course of certain episodes.
Right.
What was that like, keeping that consistency? How did you manage that? Like what was that?
I did not think for a second I was making a series.
Okay.
I had waited 5 years to make a movie. I told myself in my head I should have made 5 films by now, so I was making those 5 films at a go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was just a longer story. You treated it like a longer film.
Yeah.
With each episode, with each there's like just the drama as it keeps escalating.
Right.
What were the things that as a director were you keeping in mind that okay, the translation needs to also go there consistently throughout with each episode?
I would say we took care of that at the script level, that the cliffhangers should be there at the ending of every episode, not gradually throughout, because we were writing a character piece. more to say, which becomes a thriller as it progresses, and that it needs to have action. There were enough good shows at that point to refer to from HBO. And the one that I think referred the most was this BBC mini series called The Edge of Darkness, which is just 4 episodes, not 26, but that kind of 26 episode thing anyway does not exist in the West. But you get a sense of how an episodic story should function. I think once you take care of that in writing, in direction, it automatically follows if if the choices of your shot division are right.
Okay.
And shot division is very intrinsic. It's like, the difference between a sheet music and actual composition. I can hand you sheet music, but you might read very differently than I would read. You might arrange the orchestra very different than I would. So then those are subconscious choices which I won't be able to articulate because I was not consciously trying to, I have to keep this going. It's like you do what you're supposed to do and then you edit the way you're supposed to edit, and hopefully it will all fall in place.
What is your shot division process like? Do you storyboard a lot beforehand or like before?
No.
So what is it that like? Do you go on set and just let the space kind of pour itself?
No, it's there in the script. Then I do it from the script.
Okay.
Then I discuss it with the cameraman, and we do it with the production designer. We do it that way. And then when we are on the recce, we fine tune it. And then on the day of the shooting, then we do it with the actor and then fine tune it further.
Okay, you know what what your angles are gonna be before you do the blocking?
More or less.
Okay, so it's more like creating the situation around the movements and everything than doing the movements first with the actors and then finding places of just what to capture, where to capture from.
Roughly a mix.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not that I tell my actors the shot division. I don't. Let them rehearse it in the morning. But see, certain decisions you've already taken. The dimensions of your walls, the placement of your props, the fixed props, so to say, the size of your set. So actor is coming on to that. So certain decisions you've already taken. You have just not lit those specific spots which they are, which they will now create as they will walk around. But you've also already chosen your aspect ratio, your lens choices. So that would dictate, how an actor would travel from this point to this point. You've already given requirement for whatever you need. It's not that actor is going to move from here and then I'll give a requirement for that I need a panther dolly or a steady cam. So certain choices you've already made for the day, and then certain choices once you see actors' movements. So it's a bit of an amalgamation, but I feel one should leave a room for actors to freely explore the space.
You have a certain knack for anamorphic lenses. When did that start?
Because I've grown up watching those films, When I was growing up, everything was anamorphic.
Yeah.
So,
but I think you distinctively used it in Berlin and in Class of 83 is when I remember the imagery very clearly. Is where I see you using it extensively throughout.
Though I wanted to do Aurangzeb also on that, but that's a long story why we could not.
Okay.
But I can tell you the technical reason of why we could not, because anamorphic is, so the film negative, because we shot it on film, has 4 perfs, which is the 4 sprocket holes on each side, and the film moves. Now, as the technology advanced many years ago, what the cameras were tweaked to when the spherical lenses came to 3 perf. So by shooting 1 perf less, you're actually saving 25% of the raw stock. So what would get finished in 4 cans, you'll actually end up shooting in 3, which is a lot of money saved to the producer. But you can't use anamorphic lenses because anamorphic can only shoot 4 perf, whereas your spherical, which is Super 35, could shoot 3, could even shoot 2. There are movies that have been shot on 2 perfs also. Perf meaning perforation.
Perforations.
Okay. So because we were shooting film and I was directing the first film, so the producers had no clue whether how much money is going to get blown on raw stock, whether I'd be economical or not. So they said, might as well shoot 3 perf. So out went anamorphic and we shot spherical Super 35.
But at some point, anamorphic was on the table. That okay, you guys might go anamorphic with that.
No, you can't. Once you've made that choice, then you've made that choice.
Okay. Well,
In digital, it doesn't matter.
which one would you do you prefer now, like digital cinematography or the film? What would you like shooting on?
I don't think in India that option is available because you don't get, the labs are not there and the dealers are not there and all that. But I would say I'm equally comfortable with both now.
There's a certain romanticism attached to film, no?
I don't agree with it because a lot of terrible films have also been shot on 35mm.
Of course.
Entire era or entire decade of 90s and 80s. All the bad films were also shot on 35mm only, and some of them were also anamorphic. So it's not that shooting on film or on anamorphic is going to make it look better. What can make it look better is your sense of aesthetics and all that. So I love this film. I think Pablo Larraín's No, with Gael Garcia Bernal, and that's shot on U-matic, which is the cheapest format, and many years ago before. So it's low res because they wanted to replicate a certain 80s television look. So really doesn't matter.
Yeah, but like you have gotten into analog photography as well, right?
I've not gotten into it. Because the film is available and I have a camera, which I bought in 2008.
So what has that been like? Photography, what does it, what has that?
It's amateur at its best, but it keeps your eye trained, is what I would say. It's not that it's the film medium which is making me do it. But I do it because images, but it's also the discipline. You have only 36 exposures. When you set out on the day, you can't keep firing the shutter. So you make your choices correctly.
Is this economy, the idea of economy of, just keeping it, that okay, agar ek hi shot hai, so you have to make that shot, it has to communicate emotions, it has to like get the idea across, and you have to do it, that certain discipline that you're talking about. Do you find that discipline in your writing as well?
Good question. Yes. I think any mark of maturity or professionalism is that like a samurai, if I have to kill you rather than stabbing you 20 times, if I can do it in one sword move, that's what I think the good Japanese culture has taught you, how you can scale it down. And if I have to say something to you in most economical way, the better. Then it means in one sentence I've articulated, I have clarity, I have the vision to say to you whatever I want to, rather than just say it in multiple paragraphs.
Could you give an example from one of your scripts where you felt that where earlier, in an earlier draft, something was being communicated over maybe a larger number of scenes, but you kind of found that economy that not that much is needed, I can do it in this as well?
Okay, I'll give you an example from Jubilee.
Okay.
In episode 1, where Aditi Rao Hayadri's character is in the train and she's getting off at Ratlam and she opens the door and she sees Prosenjit's character is standing there and she goes and she sits. So that scene was written with dialogue and with the sound of the huffing of the steam engine. And Vikram shot it the way it was written, but then when they were editing it, they realized it plays much better if they don't say a word to each other, but just keep the engine sound going. So that was the economy, that you don't need a single dialogue that Prosenjit says when he comes in, or Aditi says, but just the way they look at each other sort of conveys, and what the sound design is doing in the background is conveying, but that you can't tell unless you have the scene in front of you.
Yeah.
So that's economy, yeah.
But certain times, dialogue, of course, the economy of what's being said, but in terms of screen, in the screenplay, the number of scenes as well sometimes. A point established karne ke liye, this guy has a particular, like say for example, let's say Aurangzeb for that, ki shuruaat mein jo voiceover hai, what it does really well is that it sets up the stage. Okay, these are the people that this guy's family, inki family or aisa, but one might have the tendency of having a scene with a sister, having a scene just to kind of explore the dynamics of each character, just to make it feel a little more, dense. So where do you find that idea of economy coming in? कि अच्छा इतने की ज़रूरत नहीं है, इतना है तो इतना में establish हो जाएगा. It also, क्योंकि ये बहुत एक security के sense से भी आती है कि I'm secure enough कि ये idea इतने में communicate हो जाएगा.
But there's nothing wrong in having those scenes that you just talked about.
वो कट जाएंगे लेकिन वो
हाँ, but वो अगर आप काट रहे हो तो अलग बात है.
हाँ वही मैं वो उसी की बात कर रहा हूँ कि
Not
आपके process में आता है वो.
necessarily. See, as long if you can tell a story and if you hold those scenes, why not? Keep them.
You like telling the larger story? Then I mean, as a writer, your ideas have a huge like. Even in Aurangzeb or Berlin also, but Berlin is actually one idea of yours that I felt that okay, this is the one जिसको मैं एज अ सीरीज भी नहीं देख सकता हूँ दिमाग में अपने कि अच्छा इसकी सीरीज बनेगी तो आई कांट इमेजिन कि अच्छा क्या उसका आर्क होगा, लार्जर आर्क क्या होगा, बिकॉज इट्स वेरी फोकस. देयर इज अ टिकिंग बॉम्ब ऑल्सो, कैसा 7 दिन में वो होने वाला है. पर लार्जली जो आइडियाज दूसरे वाले आइडियाज है, आई वुड लव टू सी देम इन लाइक एज अ लॉन्ग फॉर्मेट ऑल्सो. डू यू एंजॉय टेलिंग द लार्जर स्टोरी और डू यू लाइक कि जो अगेन हॉलीवुड तरीका होता है कि अच्छा वो सिचुएशन एंड कीपिंग इट वेरी प्रिसाइज?
The larger story is good. Animal is a larger story. It's 3 hours plus. Most South films. I think Vikram is a long film. I haven't seen it.
Lokesh Kanagaraj's Vikram?
Lokesh Kanagaraj, yeah.
It's a long film.
I think Sultan was 3 hours plus. Ali's, or was it not? But yeah, larger. See, Hindi film narratives, if you really want to juice it out with songs and everything, they need to be that length. Like my fondest moments in cinema hall are when you sit down and the censor card says 22 reels, 23 reels. You know you are here for good 3.5 hours, as opposed to being kicked out in 2 hours.
नहीं भाई, लार्जर स्टोरी आई मीन कि जैसे मतलब ये तो एनिमल तो लंबी पिक्चर है, पर एक होता है कि उसके अंदर एक मिथोलॉजिकल एक जो नेचर होता है कहानी का, कि कहानी कहाँ से कहाँ आई, वो 2 घंटे में भी आप कह दो, कोई उसकी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. बट एक होता है कि हमने जैसे नायकन इज़ नॉट अ लॉन्ग फिल्म इन टर्म्स ऑफ ड्यूरेशन, but Nayakan has that nature of story ki you see a person's life journey as he grows older also.
But I love Diwar for that.
Diwar's influence in your work I can see very clearly.
Yes, could be.
Is that a film that you is kind of like a reference point in terms of drama, because people say it's a perfect screenplay?
That I don't know whether it's perfect or imperfect, but it has certain very good things in it, especially in terms of its staging of scenes and the way each scene is structured. Forget the overall script, like how a scene would begin and how it would end, or how certain times you would just enter the scene midway and then leave it. I think it's quite a bit of a good example of good writing, or good cinematic writing, so to say.
Because there are certain moments, even in Diwar again, where that Ravi का जो character है, he's also faced that dilemma कि अभी मैं क्या करूँ, मतलब ये मेरा भाई है पर, and then he says को जो बच्चे को गोली मार देता है, और ये शिक्षा एक टीचर से आ सकती थी.
Right.
उस तरह की चीज़ें आपकी राइटिंग में भी दिख जाती हैं कहीं ना कहीं से, कि बट नॉट उतनी फिल्मी तरीके से, बिकॉज वो टाइम भी अलग था. दैट ओल्ड स्कूल ड्रामा and that fascination with Hindi mainstream, I can see that in your scene design also. Do you at any point in a film like Aurangzeb में जैसे वो moment है जब वो अपनी माँ को कहता है कि छोड़ माँ, और मुंह से निकल जाता है, it needs a lot of conviction. Where does that conviction come from? कि अच्छा ये भी अभी भी 2013 में भी ये सीन ऐसे लैंड कर सकता है.
पता नहीं, शायद मुझे वही आता है तो मैं वही कर देता हूँ, लैंड करे ना करे. You know, but that scene that you're talking about is a straight reference from Mother India, where he beats up his mother and
exactly उसको छोड़ मार,
that one. So, but because I think I have a faith in certain timelessness of the stories or the human emotions, because human are still the same. You know, you can make a entire movie on an absentee father even today, and it will work. And Diwar was also that, without showing the father, you know, the whole father complex, and that's also a blockbuster. So I guess the stories remain the same universally. Bahubali is the same. RRR, friendship. You know, how different is that from Sholay? They've even used the bike, but it works. You know, emotionally, Titanic is Romeo Juliet. In that sense.
Exactly. एकदम माइन्यूट लेवल पे भी सीन डिज़ाइन की भी बात करें, जैसे अभी इवन से जुबली में तो काफ़ी ज़्यादा, जुबली तो ऑफ कोर्स इज अबाउट दैट. आई एम कमिंग टू जुबली कि उसमें आप दैट फैसिनेशन विद ओल्ड स्कूल हिंदी फिल्म्स, एंड नाउ विद द सब्सिक्वेंट द न्यू सीजन व्हिच आई एम होपिंग इज बीइंग मेड, इट इज
being written.
It's being written. So you're researching for that, right, Abhi?
So we did all the research that we needed to before we started writing season 1.
Oh.
So we're just writing right now.
Like you guys went all out in terms of कि अच्छा कितने eras cover करेंगे वो सारा.
I think yeah, Vikram has that idea. I'm not supposed to speak about it.
Okay. उसमें भी with Jubilee also कि अच्छा this is being done on a platform that is going to cater to a wider audience and go even global. तो ये some things which are very distinctively Indian in their like Hindi film. I'm not even saying Indian, Hindi film. उस चीज़ की भी conviction like because आपने अब कहा कि वही आता है, but इस तरह की जब आप लिख रहे हो तो आपके reference points क्या होते हैं कि मतलब ये
For Jubilee?
हाँ कि ये समझ आ जाए on a global level also for an audience.
Nah. Who gives a damn? You know, how can you ensure?
पर वहाँ पे तो feedback गिरी रही होगी काफ़ी.
Thankfully no,
नहीं?
because my only feedback was from Vikram.
Okay.
What all he handled at his end, I'm not aware of, thankfully, and how he managed. He's quite sharp that way, and I would learn through him over the years. But yeah, not to me, to be honest. Not any bad feedback, all good creative feedback from him.
What I loved in Jubilee is that certain ideas that for a layman would be very difficult to grasp. कि playback singing अगर समझानी है किसी को कि और स्पेशली ये जानते हो कि अच्छा हमें तो पता है कि अब पता है क्या कि हीरो गा रहा है तो पीछे से सिंगर गाता है, पर वो जब पहली बार समझाया गया होगा तो वो जिस तरह से वो इनैक्ट करके आता है उस सीन मतलब उस तरह के जितने सीन्स हैं थ्रू आउट वो सारे किस तरह से उनका आइडिएशन होता होगा कि वी हैव टू सिंप्लीफाई एन आइडिया व्हिच इज वेरी टेक्निकल.
Honestly, there was no ideation. When I was writing it, I just wrote. If a revision would have come, I would have revised.
Okay.
Yeah. And at that point, I was the only writer. Like, Prachi had not joined. So,
Okay.
So I think that scene, as I was thinking, I wrote and then I sent the episode to him and he never said anything. Change it. It sounds rubbish. It sounds spoon feeding or anything.
नहीं पर आपके जहन में भी तो रहा होगा ना कि लाइक इस
मेरे जहन में इतना रहता नहीं है, to be honest. When I'm writing, I just write. Then if I need to revise, I revise. So if a scene has survived and has ended up on screen, that means it has just come in the flow and has ended up there. There is no objective thought behind it, so to say, as in a decision making. You know, that why this scene should be there, what will this scene do, what an impact it can have. I don't go through those motions. I don't go through objectivity as I write.
Usually how many drafts, like do you like doing too many drafts before you go into shooting or?
No, first drafts are the best. Bana lo.
सच में?
Yeah. Jubilee is mostly first drafts. I think Vikram would corroborate. Powder is all first drafts. I think Berlin is must have done some tinkering here and there, but it's essentially first draft.
तो Berlin you have been, because I saw on your Instagram post कि एक 2017 में you had scribbled down that midpoint scene where he sees कि अच्छा वो उसके फाइल के पीछे से वो
Right.
कर रहा है. So you had this idea for a long time with you.
Yeah, I think 2016 is when I wrote that short story, which is now published in Scroll.
Okay. So that's from there on the idea of making it into a film. How did you make that leap that okay, I need to make this into a film?
I didn't. I thought the short story was quite unfilmable because it was from a deaf person's point of view. But then somebody reached out to me. They wanted to do an offbeat film, and I sent them that short story. I said, I don't know how, but if this appeals to you, this is the only offbeat thing that I have. And they said, this is nice, write a script out of it. And I wrote the script out of it, which they didn't like, which is the film that everybody saw now.
Okay.
Once they didn't like it, and I got busy with Class of 83 and Jubilee, so it was just lying around. And then by the time I finished both the projects, COVID came. So when I was sitting, I was pulling out my old stack. Okay, what can I do next? I started sending out synopsis of Berlin that this is what I would like to do. Platforms rejected it. Everybody doesn't seem like something doable. But what was happening positively was all the actors were reacting very positively to it when I was narrating.
The very interesting parts.
And once the actors started coming on board, Z Studios read it because the actors were attached, and Sharik, being quite a lover of stories himself, sort of decided to back it, and that is how it happened.
When did that shift in POV happen? From because in the short story you said it's from the deaf person's POV, and it's from the point of view of Pushkin.
Because you have to write a screenplay from a person who can translate the both. So I think The moment I decided to write the film, I decided that it has to be from this POV.
What's a particular flaw that you see in Berlin now?
I don't know, you tell me. I think it's flawless.
That's nice. That's good. Like,
But you can tell me. I'm all ears.
what I felt, if I may say, is that the stakes in the film, because we are following Pushkin so closely, उसके लिए जो stakes हैं वो फिल्म में काफ़ी देर से आते हैं, जो मुझे लगता है कि जब तक आते हैं तब तक काफ़ी कहानी बीत चुकी है. इवन जो एक बेसिक लेवल पर उसके जो कि हाँ वो सीन बड़ा इम्पैक्टफुल है, उसके बारे में मेरे को बात भी करनी है आपसे, जहाँ वो जब मिलता है विंग के लोगों से लोधी गार्डन में और वो देखता है कि मतलब मैं भी एक सरकारी मुलाजिम हूँ यार और कितना कुछ चल रहा है जो मुझे पता भी नहीं है, तो वो चीज़ जब उसे रियलाइज़ होती है वहाँ से एक उसके लिए एक इमोशनल स्टेक आ जाता है कहानी में. पर वो काफ़ी टूवर्ड्स मिड पॉइंट है एकदम. पिक्चर आधी आई थिंक उस टाइम पर, उसके बाद ही थोड़ी देर बाद ही शायद आपने इंटरवल के लिए एडिट किया था, वो जो कहते हैं कि सच क्या होता है, उसके बाद ही इंटरवल होना था.
हाँ,
तो वो मुझे लगता है एक फ्लॉ है पिक्चर के अंदर.
आई डोंट थिंक वो पिक्चर का फ्लॉ है, आपको जल्दी है कि कुछ चीज़ें जल्दी हो जाए.
हो सकता है, हो सकता है.
I mean, if my mother cooks food for me and I'm in rush and I'll gobble it down, I can't comment on the taste.
It's not like I was in a rush or something.
No, mentally we are all in a rush now. I'm not blaming you. I'm also myself also. When I switch on something on Netflix or on any platform, a good part of my mind is also thinking about 5 other thumbnails that I have missed, which could also be interesting. And other part of my mind is also on, oh, should I check Instagram? There could be notification, So we are all in a rush, whether we realize it or not. And that is why whatever is called as attention span, I don't think attention span is the issue, but we have several FOMOs, because each time we make a decision on anything, whether to watch something or sit somewhere, you could be sitting in a cafe and you've ordered a coffee and you can peacefully have that coffee, but I can bet right now that 80% of the time you'll also be checking your phone along with your coffee. And that is where the rush has set in. And if whatever stories I choose to tell and in the manner I choose to tell, my whole effort is I want it to be an antithesis to that rush for everybody, because I think we are doing a great disservice to ourselves and the possibility of the stories that we can hear or our human interaction with each other, that we are not being 100% there with anything. We are just constantly thinking about the thumbnails we have missed or the notifications that we might have missed. Like I have seen people, वो जो पॉपकॉर्न लगाने का वो स्लॉट होता है ना सिनेमा की सीट में, उसमें वो फोन में क्रिकेट का स्कोर लगा के और सामने पिक्चर देख रहे होते हैं. तो एक आंख ऐसे चल रही है, कितना स्कोर हो गया आईपीएल में, एक आंख पिक्चर में चल रही है. सो
नहीं, उस तरह की फिल्म की ना पेसिंग है कि ऐसे लोग कहते हैं स्पाई फिल्म है.
हाउ डू यू नो? मैंने तो बताया भी नहीं कौन सी फिल्म देख रहे थे लोग.
नहीं, मैं उसकी बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ. मैं ऑफ टॉपिक में बर्लिन की बात कर रहा हूँ.
आई थिंक द सिंपलेस्ट आंसर टू दैट इज बिकॉज maybe it is the mistake, and but not that I have a solution to it. I could only bring him to a certain point as a character before he can have his bearings. So it's like if he's thrust into a situation, the question can be, why does he choose to be in it? Maybe he could have refused it right up front, but since he chooses to be in it, it seems simple, but it's a spin, that he's gone through. So he has no orientation. Okay, where am I? What am I doing? Why is this happening? But after that scene with Deepak Kazir in Lodi Garden, he gets the bearing. Okay, it's a thing, what is happening, and this is my role in it. So how can I do my role properly? If I put those stakes earlier, and there's a world building that has to be done with the cafe, because if you don't understand the cafe, you won't understand Ashok's character. So once you understood the cafe, once you've understood the situation and the stakes that are him, only then he can take a call. So those were the stepping blocks for me, so to say. Could it have been done better? Perhaps. Do I know how to do? No. At this point, not yet.
एक वो चीज़ मुझे इसलिए लगी, जैसे जो आप कह रहे हैं वो भी सही बात है सर, कि वी आर रशिंग टूवर्ड्स कि अच्छा कुछ आ जाए वैसा. वो दैट वाज नॉट द केस विद बर्लिन. व्हेन आई मीन कि वो स्टेक्स थोड़ी देर से आ रहे हैं. इट इज़ वेरी एटमोस्फेरिक, वी आर इन टू दैट वर्ल्ड, और हम बहुत क्यूरियसली वो वर्ल्ड पुष्किन के साथ डिस्कवर भी कर रहे हैं. और वो जो इट विल टेक इट्स ओन टाइम, दैट आई गेट. बट जब वो आ जाता है ना, देन यू रियलाइज़ कि अच्छा अब शायद कहानी यहाँ से, बिकॉज द कैरेक्टर इज टेकिंग अ फोर फ्रंट, कि अब इसके ऊपर है चॉइस. कि do I continue, what do I do, how do I manage this. और वो जब तक हो रहा है तब तक फिल्म I realize कि अच्छा आधी बीत चुकी है. That's what I meant कि वो थोड़ी देर से आ रहा है.
अंडरस्टूड. पर अभी कुछ कर नहीं सकते, अभी
नहीं नहीं बिल्कुल, मैं वो तो बस बातचीत करने के लिए कर रहा था कि आपको लगता है ऐसा क्या सीन है.
नहीं, मुझे तो नहीं लगता, बट गुड यू टोल्ड मी. आई मेक श्योर आई डोंट डू दोज मिस्टेक्स इन माय नेक्स्ट फिल्म. अरे आई एम सीरियस. ऐसे ही सीखते हैं यार सब.
अरे सर पुष्किन सर लाइक पहले तो सबसे पहले ओड टू लिबर्टी के कारण पुष्किन या फिर किस लिए?
Like I've said in many interviews, there was a guy called Pushkin Verma in my school.
अच्छा.
As I realized who Pushkin was later in life, I wondered why his parents would have named him Pushkin. So in my head, when I was trying to imagine Pushkin's parents in this story as to who's this guy, before started writing the script, as I was trying to imagine, okay, who is this character? Where could he be coming from? What kind of parents he would have had in the 90s and माँ बाप शायद JNU गए होंगे, ब्रेक्ट वो पढ़ाता है, कुछ थिएटर में इंटरेस्ट रहा होगा दिल्ली के. सो दैट इज़ हाउ द नेम केम. इट्स नॉट स्पेसिफिकली टू ओड टू लिबर्टी और द पोएट पुष्किन. इट्स द इन्फ्लुएंस दैट नेम हैड ऑन इंडिया एंड ऑन अ सर्टन section of society who would take it as as an influence to name their children. Like naming your child something is a big decision, so why would those parents whose son was in our school would name him Pushkin? That was the idea that it started from.
Even in the short story, this idea of a deaf person in the midst of this espionage trade fair, if I may say that, where did that idea come from? Because I do see that the early memories of Delhi are a huge part of the story, but there is a certain there's an inquisitive nature of understanding how this bureaucracy works, rather than a fascinated, glamour-laden idea. So, how did you write that short story before the script also? Like, where did that idea come from?
Because there was a waiter. I used to go to a cafe to write scripts, and they employed deaf mute staff, and there was one of the waiters was a very boisterous, chirpy character who would try to interact with you and try and find out what you're writing and all that. So that was the guy who was the inspiration for that. At what point did it move from a cafe in Bombay to bureaucracy in Delhi in 90s? I don't have a clear, I think it was a confluence of a lot of things. Reading of a lot of Le Carré fiction, Eric Ambler, and seeing some of those Kieslowski's atmospheric film of the socialist architecture and all that. It all eventually just came together in this form instead of going in that direction, a cafe in Bombay with a deaf character. But that seed is there from that character, was a cafe in Bombay and a deaf mute waiter.
कहाँ है cafe?
था, अभी बंद हो गया.
कहाँ पे था लेकिन?
It was in Andheri, Lokhandwala, where Options showroom used to be, uske diagonally opposite.
So when this whole world of, as you said, socialist architecture, what was the wrecking like for this film? क्योंकि we do see that वो एक ईस्टर्न जर्मनी जैसे जो स्ट्रक्चर्स थे, इवन द स्कूल जहाँ पर वो सिखाता है, वो जो स्टेयरकेसेस का जिस तरह से आपने यूज़ किया है, and it's more not in terms of just the locations, it's also how you framed them, how you composed them. There's a towering presence of these buildings. So how did you, was that a setting just from an idea of a setting in a scene, or ये एक character की तरह ही treat करना था शुरू से?
But every architecture has its character if filmed right.
But लेकिन और फिल्मों में, आपकी और फिल्मों में, we don't see architecture playing that big of a part.
See, we tried in Class of 83 also. Architecture, not as straight line but as arches. If you see the film a little more closely, though I won't recommend.
No, I have seen it.
You can take screenshots. So there is a certain motif of arches. The problem with Class of 83 also is that we wanted to keep the film, despite, because we were shooting anamorphic, to keep it in 2.35. But there was certain kind of fear that since it's going to come on small screen, you crop it. So once you crop it, the width of the frame loses its own character for you to, because your characters come up front, so you're not seeing the space that they are inhabiting. But it was there on Aurangzeb. it was also there to an extent that the idea was, because Gurgaon back then was still massively under construction, the metro was still coming up, but it was more than the architecture, it was the natural landscapes, the dusty barren fields, where the concrete is coming up in the background. So if you see the scene where I think Arjun goes and gives a CD to Prithviraj and Rishi Kapoor is there, and it's all wild grass, but in the background these buildings have started to come up, or each time they're meeting there's some kind of a jungle, and in the background you see these buildings, or even where Anupam Kher's character lives. So it's the landscape meeting architecture. So I think I've always tried that here because of the right blend of lensing, which I could not get before, right aspect ratio, which could highlight that, which we could not get in Class of 83, is where, now it suddenly seems like as if it's the first time I've explored it.
It comes out more naturally here.
Yeah.
Because again, Aurangzeb, you do see that it's part of the detailing for sure. Ki even if he's coming out of that hospital and calling Arya, when Arjun Kapoor does that in the night, you do see the details. Ki acha ek certain tarah ka ek parking lots and under construction buildings and the contrasting it with कि आर्या का जो घर भी है वो जिस जगह पे है जिस तरह के एरिया में it is there as part of the setting, पर यहाँ it feels more like कि यहाँ के जो low angle shots में भी is just from a point of view or not just using it as a setting, it's more like कि अच्छा it's a character कि.
Also, it could be that I've become better at framing or suggesting frames to cinematographer. So that's also in part of evolution. Like, sometimes when you're starting out, you're just happy to have the location and you're shooting and you're thinking it's all coming on the camera. But it's not. So it could also be that, though, despite me thinking that I was doing this all along, I've just become better at doing it.
Probably that.
Yeah.
It's quite minimal. Now, I want to know about the minimalism in Berlin because.
ये तो तूने minimal से शुरू किया था ये podcast, अभी तो वापस
उस सर्कल पे आता हूँ सर मेरा स्ट्रक्चर 3 एक्ट के बाद पहले पे आता है.
Okay.
क्योंकि मिनिमल बर्लिन में बहुत स्पेसिफिकली इसलिए मैं भी कह रहा हूँ क्योंकि मैंने जैसा आपने जो स्टोरीज अपनी शेयर करी थी इंस्टा पे भी पोस्ट में कि सर्टन फ्रेमिंग एंड कॉम्पोजिशन चॉइसेस वर नॉट आउट ऑफ लाइक मोर डिक्टेटेड बाय कि क्या उस एरा का अवेलेबल है. Like CP, you guys had to frame a certain way because of those pillars. तो उन चीज़ों से डिटेल्स के थ्रू और कॉम्पोजिशन के थ्रू आपने एक सेंस क्रिएट कर दिया, एक एटमोसफेयर क्रिएट कर दिया. अभी वो थ्रू आउट द फिल्म एक लैंग्वेज का पार्ट बन जाती है इवन इन साउंड डिज़ाइन. बिकॉज हम जो भी वो अशोक बता रहा है हम साइन लैंग्वेज के थ्रू वॉइस ओवर में सुन रहे हैं, पर जो उस दौरान जो वो जी रहा है उसकी साउंड डिज़ाइन भी उतनी है जितनी वो सुन पा रहा है. पहली बात तो कि ये इमेजिन कर पाना कि उसने क्या सुना होगा, और दूसरी चीज़ कि जब हम एक 90s का एक ऐसा टाइम जो कई लोगों के लिए मेमोरी है और कई लोगों के लिए तो वो है भी नहीं मेमोरी, जैसे हम जैसों के लिए वो एरा मेमोरी नहीं है, तो उसमें भी कि एक सर्टेन डिटेल्स इतने ही दिखा के उसको बहुत कम में रखना, इकोनॉमिकल रखना, वो डिसीजन पे आप कैसे पहुँचे कि हो सकता है कि इसको और फैला दिया जाए या एक्सेस ऑफ, क्योंकि हम क्या करते हैं जब प्रोडक्शन डिज़ाइन में कुछ भरना होता है तो एक एक्सेसिव सेटिंग्स भी यूज़ करते हैं. इसमें काफ़ी मिनिमल रखा गया है.
जैसे इस मनी प्लांट की कोई ज़रूरत नहीं थी.
बिल्कुल नहीं, बैलेंस करने के लिए है वो. मतलब इसका कुछ बाद में बोल दूंगा कि इसका कुछ मीनिंग है कि आइडिया आप दे रहे हो और ये वो है विजडम ट्री है.
So I don't hear a question in this.
नहीं, I don't. Like, how did you that ideation was, what was that ideation like?
No, see, specifically on sound design, there were two important points. One was sound as a memory, which is an idea I got from a movie called English Patient, which Walter Murk had done. So each time he's thinking back to his time in the desert, there's some memory trigger in the sound which is happening in the present in France, which takes him to his memory to Africa, the protagonist, the patient. Now you try and do a reverse of this, that how would, in an absence of sound, memory would play. So that was the first brief to the sound designer, that you have to go into memory, but the sound has to be absent. So once you tell that, articulate that to sound designer, then it becomes a template. Okay, how would I do it? The second was your own personal memory. Like I got reminded of it recently when I was watching the film after it came on Z5, that I think first time when Pushkin gets off the bus and walks and he's abducted in the car. The sound designer had done his track laying and everything, and there was things, and my first reaction was, this does not sound like a winter night in Delhi, because there were frogs croaking and everything, you know. So it sounded more like late night village in Kerala, you know, and that could also be because my sound designer lives in Chennai, so his memory of a night is in a coastal place as opposed to an arid place, which is Delhi. And had I not witnessed those nights personally, I would have not known, you know. That is why when you see story set in India but made by the directors in the West, so to say, they don't have, you find something amiss, you know. The visuals are all there, but and they may win an Oscar also, but there's something is amiss. So then we started taking those things out. I said, no, this is not right for Delhi night, this is not. And that is how then it became minimal, because Delhi winter nights are windy, especially back then when construction was not so much and there were not so many vehicles on the street by default, because not so many people had cars. So the roads had not turned into parking lots. So organic, see, once you see the mistakes, then you realize, okay, there is extra, and you start taking it out. You know, so that is how that happened. That it was all put, and then it, because it's all post-production, it could be removed.
Also, the minimalism also comes from the fact कि आप लोग जब वहाँ location पे shoot कर रहे होंगे, there must be excessive traffic and everything.
No, we chose those locations where the traffic was not.
Okay.
Like, I'm glad you think it was Connaught Place, but it was not.
नहीं, I know it was not. मैंने पढ़ लिया था आपका post का. मैंने वो भी पढ़ लिया था वो, and the government quarters also that you guys looked for where you could not shoot. I saw the pictures of that as well.
Yeah.
So when you were creating these details, even the newspaper, how he sees that, how were those instruments created now? Like, are they still? I don't think उस तरह का slides
No, I think that was a fabrication.
हाँ.
The microfilm viewer,
yeah.
that was a fabrication.
Okay. I saw that list of films that you kind of, as a watch list you put out for Berlin. तो उसमें Sparsh, Sai Paranjpe is Sparsh. What influence did Sparsh have on Berlin?
It's a differently able teacher teaching differently able students what his life is. So if I have to imagine what would Pushkin be, he would be living that kind of life. What would that house be? And it's also shot in those parts of Delhi which Berlin refers to. So I think Sai Paranjpe is or two films, Chashme Badur and Sparsh.
Chashme Badur is a very Delhi film.
Have been shot in those parts of Delhi, which is not like the Delhi of Band Bacha Barat or other such films. Yeah. And New Delhi Times by Ramesh Sharma. I could see those, like that 80s की जो parallel cinema में जिस तरह का दिल्ली हम देखते थे, वो उसका influence यहाँ पे costumes में बहुत ज़्यादा दिख रहा था. And it's done very well. Like the influences of those films that you listed, there's a Parallax View and All the President's Men, these are very apparent. But films like Notorious, like how did Notorious come into this entire? Do you remember Notorious? Yeah. You remember the key sequence where she's hiding the key in her fist and then she goes down and opens the wine cellar, but somebody else also realizes that they have the key missing. Yeah. You get the idea? I get the idea. Lekin because you've executed it in a very different manner. Why I asked you earlier कि जो minimalism का idea आता है आपका इसमें, वो क्योंकि इन सारी फिल्मों में emotions का भी एक certain interplay है. बर्लिन में क्या है, emotions आप जो फील कर रहे हो, यू आर लेफ्ट विद दोज फीलिंग्स कि एटमोसफेयर क्रिएट करके आपको फिल्म दे देगी. नाउ व्हाटएवर टेंशन यू आर फीलिंग इज बिकॉज यू आर रीडिंग इट एंड यू आर विद द कैरेक्टर्स. हाउ डू यू विद योर शॉर्ट डिवीजन एंड हाउ यू रिदमिकली पुट इट टुगेदर, वो प्रोसेस आपके लिए कैसा था? लाइक व्हाट वाज देयर, डिड इट कम वेरी like instinctively कि the tension has to be built like that by doing less, not more? So I think I was just staying true to the milieu, because the references are not literal at any given point. Different films inspire different things in you. I may have missed one or two films in that list also, I don't remember now. But it's not as straightforward that, if Notorious has these emotions, then my film will have these emotions. Or if Parallax View or All the President's have this minimalism, then I will also have that minimalism. It's just organically whatever your story requires, because when I was writing the story, the short story, I had none of these references. It's only after I'd written the screenplay, when I'm trying to understand, okay, what visual shape it can take, is that when I started watching the films.
Did you at any point feel like it was a challenge कि visually, like when some directors do have that feeling कि अच्छा scene में there are literally two characters sitting and there's someone watching और एक confined space है, तो visual also जिसमें एक बंदा इशारों में बात कर रहा है, दूसरा बंदा उसको translate कर रहा है, फिर अपने भी बात कह रहा है, तो ऐसे में एक किसी भी point पे एक ऐसा लग रहा था कि यार ये पुल ऑफ करना है, सीन होल्ड कर पाना विजुअली डिफिकल्ट हो सकता है, या फिर वो कभी था ही नहीं ध्यान में?
I don't think when you're directing a film, you should psych yourself into fear. You should only psych yourself into confidence. Only then you'll be able to finish it. You know. So no.
ऐसे में आपके शॉर्ट डिविजन्स किस तरह से डिक्टेट होते हैं कि क्योंकि आप ज़्यादातर कैरेक्टर्स उतना मूव भी नहीं कर रहे हैं, देर वॉचिंग एंड देयर टू पीपल सिटिंग एंड देयर यू कैन डू सो मेनी थिंग्स, बट उसमें what is guiding your short division at that point?
The only thing that was guiding me that I should be able to see Ashok's hands, because that's his only means of communication, so I should not move the camera too close, and whichever way Ashok's image is, whatever the size of that image is, Pushkin should replicate that.
Okay.
You know, and at a later point, once the audience has settled into a bit of thing that okay, he is moving his hands, then you can go a little bit of closer, because then you can just have a sense of hands moving. You don't need to see the precise movement, and that is how accordingly you alter Pushkin's image on the opposite end. So they're usually mirror images on each side.
और ये रिदम आपने एडिट पे डिस्कवर किया था या फिर स्क्रिप्ट पे ही था कि कुछ चीज़ें which really works in the film is that the scenes when they are in that interrogation room, scenes are flowing at a certain pace, पर जैसे बाहर जा रहे हैं things are going like that कि mid action कुछ कट हो रहा है और mid we are jumping into certain spaces and then coming back to it. It's almost like एक rhythm इस space का it's space related the rhythm I feel कि जब आप यहाँ पे हो, जब वो बात हो रही है तीनों characters की, तब it's flowing normally और उसके बाद it's going like that. तो ये rhythm आपने edit पे discover करा था या फिर?
I think so.
So those were like there were larger bits that you might have shot for those sequences which have been cut.
No, we shot what is there.
Okay.
There's not extra coverage that is lying somewhere on the cutting floor.
Okay.
Or rather in the hard drive.
What was your approach to background music? Like what was scoring this one like? Like isme what any reference points that you had in your mind?
There was Aaron Copland's fanfare for the common man. There was Finlandia by Sibelius. There was Clint Mansell's Lunar Industries. These 2-3 pieces were there as reference. But again, it's a matter of what score as a test you put on your footage on the final edit that sort of carries the same rhythm. You know, you can put any music, and a lot of films get ruined because of that. Sometimes forced BGM and sometimes wrong BGM. You know, no matter how atmospheric it is. And these references, once they started to enhance the cut that we had, then I think we shared those references with our composer, K. And my only brief to him was just don't change the tempo, you know, because the tempo is then carrying through the film, because like, at least for me. Then, so he honored that tempo and kept that, you know, finding his own compositions within that rhythm and tempo.
Certain pieces in the score where there's a montage where like the characters moving somewhere from point A to point B, where there are scenes going on, the background score is almost very minimal. But when there is background score, it almost is like कि अच्छा ये एक song sequence जैसा put किया गया है, like without the lyrics. So do you write music in your scripts उस तरह से? Because it feels like इस portion के लिए music था दिमाग में, ये edit पे discover नहीं करा गया. That's what it comes across as at least.
Sometimes, but I don't know, not specifically. It's not that if I've written music in the script, it will essentially have music in the film. Sometimes you feel you've written, but it's working without. And sometimes you're not written music, but it's there in the film.
But do you have music in your mind while you're writing? Like as a dimag
Not essentially. I have, but it's not necessarily the music that you will hear.
Okay.
The music that I listen to while I'm writing to get myself into the mood of that story is not necessarily the music that you will see, because you know when you shoot, the footage ends up being a certain way, even if you're listening to that music while shooting also, and eventually the music has to honor the footage that you have, ideally.
Yeah. So what, like moving now after Berlin, what is it that you're driven by more as an idea?
I don't know, same ideas I guess, you know, similar tragedies and stories. I enjoy telling stories which have a tragic bent, whether it was Jubilee or My Wife's Murder, or even those certain stories within Darna Mana, whether it's Homework or Apples. So I guess I'll keep moving forward the same way.
Why do you think tragedies fascinate you so much?
Because there's more drama, and most of our successful Hindi films have been tragedies. Sholay, Mother India, Diwar, Shiva, Satya, even the dubbed ones, Chiranjeevi's Pratibandh, Parinda.
Parinda.
Everything is a tragedy. Lamhe, even the ones that did not work. Or have a tragic overtone. It need not necessarily have a sad ending. Most of them have. Because I think those films are successful. Like, why is Sholay more successful than Chupke Chupke? It almost has the same cast.
Yeah.
They both film are regarded very much. But why is Sholay more remembered? Like, you would remember each and every line and each and every character. There are people who would remember from Chupke Chupke also. Dialogues written by none other than Gulzar Saab. But I think tragedies have more timelessness about them as opposed to...
So moving forward, can you talk about what are you thinking of directing next?
I don't know, whatever gets made.
So you have a few scripts. Do you work like this? Sudhir sir bolte hain ki at any point a director should have 20 stories अपने पास में कि ये नहीं तो ये बना दो, ये नहीं तो ये बना दो.
20 तो नहीं बना, 2-3 तो होनी चाहिए. 2 पुरानी, 1 नई.
है कोई पुरानी जो बहुत टाइम से बनाना चाह रहे हैं आप?
सभी कुछ बहुत टाइम से ही बनाना चाहते हैं.
Okay, so with this we come to the end of today's session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing this, sir. And thank you so much for watching this. If you guys liked it, please like, share and subscribe. And do tell us in the comments what do you want next on our show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is a very big budget show. Please do watch, subscribe, share.
एक बारी आप भी कह दो,
Somebody should
subscribe करने के लिए कह दो, sir.
Yeah, please subscribe for whosoever is the channel.
मैं free में आता हूँ.